Patrick DePeters, and I'm your host of Quiet Leaders. And this is the very first podcast that I've ever hosted, really. And I'm super excited to welcome Tucker Paron to the show. Tucker is someone that I have gotten to know over these last couple of weeks, and I actually knew him casually and sort of at a distance because he's the son of my mentor. And when we caught up recently on a conversation with Tucker's father, Tom, he followed up with a video that was something that really caught my attention. It made me realize not only would I really enjoy speaking with Tucker, but I think I'm hoping the audience will also enjoy hearing from him, and we'll dig into his story. So without further ado, Tucker, I'd like to welcome you to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Patrick. Really appreciate the introduction and so happy to have another chat with you. Really excited.
Awesome. So let's kick things off with what I mentioned in my sort of quick intro there about the video at UVM. If you wouldn't mind just kind of sharing with the audience, like what's in the video, what's that all about, and then share your experience as it relates to playing soccer at UVM.
Absolutely. So the video you're referencing is pretty much a local news story from a Burlington, Vermont news station covering my journey walking on to the University of Vermont men's soccer team. And yeah, that happened this past fall, but was kind of a 4.5, 5 year ordeal that they captured, or at least the tail end of it.
Amazing. So yeah, would love to hear kind of where things started at UVM. If you could sort of share with the audience, your story there. I think that would be very enlightening, because I know we'll dig into a number of pieces that are particularly interesting, at least from my perspective, but would love to hear, the play-by-play from your side.
Absolutely. So I'll start a little farther back than UVM, just because I feel like some context is important. Basically, I had always played soccer growing up. I started playing when I was 3 years old or so. Played travel soccer with Woodbury Bethlehem Youth Soccer, just my local town team in Woodbury, Connecticut, up until I was, 14 or 15. Then played high school soccer at the Gunnery, which is now the Frederick Gun School. And then, was trying to get recruited. Didn't really work out. Not too much interest from, Division 3 schools. Division 1 schools wouldn't even answer my emails, that sort of thing. And eventually landed on UVM, basically just for school. I was familiar with the campus. My sister went there. They had a data science program that I was very interested in, and they had a good soccer program that I felt, for whatever reason, that I could walk onto. So I landed on UVM, enrolled, got to campus fall of 2019, and kind of had it in my head, end of senior year of high school, leading into that first semester, that, all right, well, I had some moderate success in high school, had a good junior and senior season from an individual standpoint. I'm going to walk in here and I'll be the best player on the club team, and then I'll probably just play or walk onto the varsity team, that spring. And I get to campus, a week or two go by, and then we have club soccer tryouts. So we go to the first tryout, things go well. I go to day 2 of the tryouts, things go well. And then we get to day 3, and they're not really making too many cuts day 3, so I'm not too concerned about it. But I don't play great. And then at the end, they're like, all right, we're going to send you an email if you made the A team or the B team, because there's two club teams. There's like an A team and a B
Oh, wow.
team, so 50 guys. There's
Mhm.
a lot of spots. And an email doesn't come. So I text one of my buddies who's also trying out. I'm like, well, what's the deal here? And um, he's like, well, I got my email. So quickly I realized I just didn't make the team, and that was a kind of a devastating moment for me. because, as I mentioned, I kind of had these high expectations coming into school, and also soccer was kind of my whole identity. You know, I was a soccer kid in high school, like that was my whole thing, and now I'm being told, no, like you're not good enough. And that was hard to grapple with, but you pick yourself up, and I started just playing pickup soccer. There was a great group of Burlington locals who would play in the UVM indoor facility every day at 5 p.m. So I'd be there every day, leave at, 8, 9, 10 p.m. I would just be there playing, having fun, building my confidence, getting fit. And then I had to wait until my sophomore year to try out again for the club team. So sophomore year rolls around, um, you know, everything with COVID kind of cuts freshman year short, but I continue training on my own. And then when sophomore fall arrives, try out, and this time I make the club team. But again, it's COVID. We're not competing against other schools. So everything's just inter squad. And so I don't really have a chance to like prove to myself that I can really get it done even at this level. So I'm like, okay, how can I get closer to this goal of walking on if I can't yet prove to myself that I'm good enough at the club level? So an opportunity arises. Professor Pablo Bose reaches out to me and two of my buddies, Owen and Atticus Patrick, who are also were in the data science program. And he's like, hey, the UVM athletics department is looking for some data science students to help out. So we're like, oh, what teams? And he says, I think swimming, women's hockey, and men's soccer. So they're also big soccer fans. So we jump on that. We're like, oh, we got to get in. And I'm thinking, this is my chance to, get in with the coaches, build a little relationship, and then hopefully weave in the playing. So I meet the coaches. I don't say a peep about playing because honestly I'm too intimidated, and um so I just hold off on that, keep training on my own. Junior year rolls around. Finally have a club season to kind of play against other teams, show myself and others that I'm like capable at this level. I have a successful junior season with the club team individually, and then that spring I go to the coaches and the varsity coaches and I ask, hey, can I have a trial? They're like, sure. So I go in for that spring season, and I go in maybe once a week, train with the team for 6 to 8 weeks, something like that. And at the end of it, I ask, is anything going to come of this? And pretty much they're like, no, uh, you know, we just didn't see enough. Excuse me. And that was tough because I'm already a junior. So I start to get a little, worried. I'm ending or getting close to the end of my college career. So, excuse me. So I am like, all right, well, I'm going to try again next year. So I come in senior year, again, training all throughout. Senior year, I get hurt during the club season. So I pretty much missed the whole club season. And then I'm just rehabbing. At the end of the club season, I asked, hey, can I try it again? So again, this is the end of my senior year. And pretty much like, you know what, sure. And this time I get a little bit more of a shot. So I'm training with the team every day, lifts, whole deal. Go through the entire spring. At the end of the spring, my senior year, I go in, meet with the coaches. Okay, what's the deal? I'm staying on for, forgot to mention this. I'm staying on at UVM for next year because I was doing a 1 year grad program. And basically, they tell me we didn't see enough. We can't offer you a roster spot, but you can train with the team in the fall. So basically, you're not going to get a jersey, you're not going to get a locker, you can't play in the games, but you can train with us. And that was really, really tough pill to swallow. Because it was, 4.5 years, 4 years I'd spent, and, I felt like kind of my window was closed. So I thought about it, went back to the coaches and said, you know what, I'll take a chance. And they had promised me that if anyone left or anyone had to leave the team, that I would be the first in line to take that spot. And part of my thinking for coming back to the team was, if I said no to that and a spot were to open up, then, I really wouldn't have been able to live with myself because I would have missed this opportunity. So I come back for preseason, have a good preseason. The day before our first game, um, a player had to leave for personal reasons a few days before, and the coaching staff surprised me with a roster spot, and I was able to, realize that dream of really being on the team, and got to experience that whole season with the team. We, made it to the third round of the NCAA tournament, got a number 14 national ranking. And, while I had a really minimal role in the playing side, I just had a really amazing experience and felt felt very fulfilled at the end of it that I got to achieve this. And that's pretty much the whole thing. So that was a very long-winded way of going through it, but that's the pretty much the whole story start to finish.
Wow, that's incredible story. Thank you. Thanks for sharing, all those details. And yeah, I was hoping you'd sort of give us the play-by-play, because I think something that we'll talk a little bit about is sort of focusing on the result. If you were to just focus on the fact that you made the team, but not all the things and the trials and tribulations that came before it, that doesn't make for nearly as good of a story as the one you just shared. And I think one of the things that we'll double click on, because you didn't yet share so much about that professor reaching out to you and what became, what you ended up creating that got the attention of the team. So we'll explore that in a second. But as it relates to your time at UVM, I played kind of intramural, sports in college, which is to say not seriously, just, there's a lot of people like me that love sports that don't necessarily want to, well, certainly, I don't think I'd make the cut for any of the teams. I know I wouldn't, but I do enjoy playing sports. But I will say that from my own experience, I wasn't thinking about the varsity sports and the possibility of making them at any point in my college time. And it sounds like you were. So can you maybe share with us, where your head was through that journey? And is this a daily kind of thought that this is a goal somewhere in the distance that you're just going to keep putting one foot in front of the other to kind of not give up on and pursue? Or did it sort of feel and impact your like day to day in a different way?
Absolutely. I think I started, pursuing this thing because, like I mentioned, soccer was just so much a part of my identity that, continuing to play at as high of a level as I could was just the most logical next step. It was just like it felt like that's what I should be doing. And I think part of why I started pursuing this goal was probably for more shallow reasons. Like, maybe I thought it was cool to, be on a Division 1 team. Maybe I wanted some of the status that came along with it. Maybe, I thought it would make me cooler or something. And those whys pretty quickly deteriorated because as things got tough, when I got cut from the club team, or when, you know, every single day for 3 years I was training alone and just like going through that over and over. Not that it was, the worst thing in the world, at the end of the day I'm playing soccer, so I wanna keep that in perspective. But, there were moments that were hard, and when I needed to lean on my why in those moments, the shallow, doing it because it's cool, doing it because I want size, that quickly had to, fall by the wayside. And the things that filled its place were things of more substance. Like I'm trying to prove something to myself. And then as the journey progressed, it became I need to not let down the people that have supported me already for the first year, 2 years of this. Because if I just quit in year 3, like, I'm letting I'm letting my parents down. I'm letting some of my friends down that supported me throughout it. So that was always in my head throughout the 4 years, is like what my why was, and it shifted, and I think for the better. Um, yeah, I think if that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. Um, you mentioned there your support system. To what extent, because, and then you also mentioned uh, the day-to-day reality of sometimes training by yourself and hitting the gym by yourself and playing pickup by yourself and hitting against the wall, or everyone, I don't know how many people out there have played soccer, probably most of us at some point, but like shooting on an empty net with no players on field is not exactly, it's not the most engaging thing, unless you bring a ton of soccer balls and you love the kind of the solitude of it, but it's not the game of soccer. Of course, you can hone your skill in certain ways, but it's not quite the same. So tell us about the support system you had around you. You mentioned your parents, you mentioned your friends. I know obviously a professor was engaged at some part of this, and to the extent he also knew of your on the field ambitions, would love to hear about that. To the extent the club team coaches or the club team itself was also aware of your ambitions to kind of graduate from that level, would love you to speak to just what that support system looked like through the journey.
Absolutely. Well, I'd say my parents, my family were my main support system because they kind of knew about my, ambitions to do this the whole time. So they were always very, very supportive. And, to some, it would probably seem like I was wasting a lot of time because, as I got to 21, and I'm still going out for 2 hours just to play soccer when, maybe I could be um, working on my resume or doing something career focused. And they never, made me feel guilty or any type of way about that. They were always very, very supportive. So I think that was really big. Um, and then the club team and just friends just provided just a community for me to feel comfortable and be able to, really express myself on the field and just as a person that allowed me to just continue to grow, and be able to cope and deal with challenges that eventually allowed me to achieve this thing. But for the most part, I didn't tell a lot of people my goal until maybe my junior senior year because I was embarrassed honestly about it, because especially when I was my freshman year when I wasn't even on the club team, I didn't want to tell someone, hey, yeah, I really want to walk on the team. They're like, oh, you're on the club team, and I'm like, no, it didn't really work out. So I was honestly embarrassed because maybe I didn't even think I was good enough for a time, and yeah, but for the most part, people were really supportive, and um, yeah, lots of groups were helpful. And then you mentioned the professor Pablo Bose. He actually wasn't aware of like the playing side at all. It was just kind of a very fortunate coincidence. I was in one of his classes, um, which was like the geography of sport, I believe, and he just knew that I and my two buddies were data science students, and he knew that the athletics department was looking for data science students, and then just kind of connected us. So it was really lucky. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I think the having a support system around in any capacity is totally critical. I've learned that and in my life path, my career path, as an entrepreneur, um, no one gets to where they want to go alone. And if they do, they're certainly not the people I'm reading about and admiring, because the journey's hard, right? There's no like linear path to most things that are valuable. Um, so before we get into the
Can I,
academic
Patrick,
piece,
can I ask you one thing?
yeah.
Just what you said there made me think of something. Did did you have moments like that where you were embarrassed to tell people a goal?
Um, I think I was more embarrassed to tell people that the goal that I had told people was not gonna happen in some way. So like my last startup, the pet food company, um, I was pretty, I became quite passionate and quite vocal about it. I mean, I'd be at parties showing people on my phone the pitch deck and the idea and what we're gonna do before any of it. So I get very excitable. And so I don't hold back too much on saying the kind, as the CEO of the company, it's like you have to kind of embody the vision, and even though you know the realities of how hard it will be, um, I also know that having a certain amount of confidence and conviction and passion can go a long way to getting other people to join you, and to, in some ways, convincing yourself. The fake it till you make it thing, I know you and I have talked about before, it gets misconstrued because I think that, you have to be a D1 soccer player on the roster before you are that. Like before you get the kind of the final kind of like touch or the tap, let's say. Um, you have to be that, and that's why you are offline in quiet time, when other people are maybe partying or um, in the library or pursuing other interests or traveling or whatever. You were playing soccer and lifting and trying to get better. Um, and because you wanted to be the thing that you saw on the field, which was a level that you were being told you're not quite there. And um, one thing we'll talk about as we rewind the tapes of your earlier education is your undersized kind of character, or let's call it attribute, as a younger soccer player. Less so now, but certainly then in high school you were undersized. So we'll talk about that. And I think I was also sort of usually not the biggest person on the hockey team or the lacrosse team or whatever, but if you see that there's a standard that is what it takes to be competitive and to kind of start and to make the team, or whether it's varsity or club or what have you, then I feel like that is a goalpost, no pun intended, for what you have to train yourself to become, and you start that right away, even if it's a little amount, right? It's like making these little decisions throughout your day or week in college. As freshman, sophomore, junior, most college kids are, and I'm sure University of Vermont kids are having a good time a lot of the time, like University of Richmond where I went. And so to have the discipline and the resolve to kind of do what it takes to literally morph your body and your skills and your mindset, especially, into something that will eventually get the tap on the varsity team, is something most people don't do, which is why most people don't have the story that you have. And the people that do are the people that we all look up to, because I don't know a single successful like business person, entrepreneur, or professional that hasn't had serious setbacks at some point in their life that make them question everything and make them feel sometimes like, frankly, they have cake on their face at some level. Like you failed on some project, you gave it your all and it wasn't enough. Like that can hurt. But it also, I've learned, is an opportunity. The whole thing is an opportunity for growth, the whole trajectory. Because even if you didn't make the team, you would have still have shown yourself something in yourself that made you better, and showed people around you, your character and your work ethic and all these things that are kind of intangibles. So before we go to the academic side of things, because I want to also note you're no slouch. You're no kind of like, student gets in just because of his like athletic pursuits. You're clearly a smart guy. We went to the same high school, which I know was a great high school, in the Frederick Gunn School in Washington, Connecticut. I've seen and heard many of the things that you've done from your dad and from others that, our alma mater sometimes showcases a lot of things you've done. And so the athletic pursuits are a big part of your, as you call it, identity, but the academic stuff was also always there. And so we'll explore how you were able to lean on that side of things, and then where that came from. I think we'll make for some really interesting conversation on those points. But before we get there, I wanted to rewind to something you said earlier about soccer being your identity. What does that mean for you?
I think when I was younger, I received a lot of maybe praise or positive feedback, because it was something that I was good at. And I think I kind of internalized that and was like, oh, like this is, you know, um, I'm getting, compliments or people like me because of this thing. So then I felt like that's kind of all I was. And I think that's common for people who play sports, especially people who play like one sport specifically and invest a lot of their time into that. Um, so yeah, I just felt like I was a soccer player, like that was like my thing. And so when I was told by not making the team that I wasn't a soccer player, it was just kind of it was just very challenging. And it confused me and forced me to just think about, who I was outside of soccer, which I really had never done.
So do you think your identity as a soccer player is only true if you get the varsity letter?
No, no, I think it's still a part of my identity. But I think since then, I've branched out more and I have more interests. And so it's still a part of my identity, but it's not the only thing, which I think is really important, for athletes or for anyone who's like kind of specialized in anything. Um, as an entrepreneur, it's important to have other interests because when entrepreneurship isn't going well, what are you going to lean on? So when soccer's not going well, I have other interests that I can lean on that allow me to just be even keel, which I think is really important because otherwise I'd just be up and down. Um,
I love that. Yeah, no, I think it's a big part of my coaching methodology is the holistic approach to our pursuits, whether it's personal, athletic, creative, you have to have those other elements to kind of balance out when one of them maybe falls out or doesn't, it takes longer or doesn't come to pass in the way you expect. I think it's just essential that you like fortify yourself with the other things. Um, so before we transition, I would just love to hear your response to this question. Why do you love soccer?
I think I loved soccer. I'll say like why I loved it in the past and why I love it now. I loved soccer in the past, I think because again, going back to receiving positive feedback, I think I I like that feeling of yeah, getting positive feedback because I was good at something, which in hindsight is kind of a shallow connection. Um, so now that I've realized, there's no real substance to that way of thinking. I think now it's more about getting to connect with people, getting to have teammates, which I think is the most amazing thing in the world, getting to go through difficult things with a group, which creates the most amazing bonds. And then from a personal side, especially with UVM, the thing I like the most about it is it can be really, really humbling. So in my position or in um, with other people who are kind of in my shoes of being towards the bottom of the totem pole on the team, if you look at the last 3, 4, 5 guys, like it can be hard to have an ego because you just get it, beaten out of you every training session. Because the moment you start to think you've got it figured out, like, that's when you have, a really bad session and you start to hear it. So you have to, just sacrifice, do the little things Because when you're not the star player, like you get humbled a lot, and that hurts, but it's also the thing that's most fulfilling. Um, and that's what I love about it now, is how humbling it can be, and getting to share those moments with teammates.
Hmm. Amazing. Yeah, I think team sports, just like my experience in a fraternity, certain clubs, certain mastermind groups, what have you, having a collection of people that is not so huge that it's really lacks intimacy, but so it's small enough that you have all these shared experiences, you have a number of things in common. Ideally, there's some kind of diversity in the group that gives you different perspectives and can, one person's strengths can complement someone else's weaknesses. It's incredible. Like there's a reason why we play team sports as kids. It's because it teaches us, I think, a lot. And in pursuit of excellence, even if you are as a kid, and most kids aren't, and I would include myself. I have my go-karting stuff, the yellow frame for my go-kart growing up. I used to race go-karts, which was like the most fun thing ever.
That's awesome.
But there was a saying that stuck with me, and I didn't end up reflecting on it until a Toastmaster speech a couple of years ago, about losing. And it was that second place is the first to lose. So I have this picture. This is me. This is one of the earlier pictures of me go-karting.
I love it. That's awesome.
Yeah. And so for a kid, I don't know, I was 8 years old. My parents didn't drill that in me, but the culture did. And the racetrack culture did. And so in retrospect, I now know it was definitely about a lot more than that. But that drive that I brought with me to other things, like when I all of a sudden started running and first marathon, qualified for Boston Marathon. I won the LA half marathon off the couch. I don't know, like, and I'm not saying that to my horn. It was just, there's some drive there that is some mix between, wholesome, as you said, the opposite of shallow. So let's call it wholesome, authentic, just kind of wanting to push yourself to be the best you can be. And then also like a little bit of, we all have egos, which is to say, there are other people watching. There's other people, engaging with the outcome or the result that you show up with, and you want it to be a certain kind of way that gives you the type of positive reinforcement that most kids get while they're growing up. Get the A, get the make varsity, push yourself. Even if most kids don't really have enough self-awareness to understand what really is going on, but I think the better coaches, teachers, and parents along that journey will hopefully instill in kids, or maybe they'll eventually come to the conclusion that it really wasn't so much about the specific test, the specific grade, the varsity letter in a given sport. It's more about growing as a person, trying new things, trying to be good at new things that require discipline and focus and sacrifice and all that kind of stuff. So definitely don't need to preach any of that to you, because you totally get it. But I think it's really, really important. And I also wouldn't beat yourself up about the shallow reasons, because at the end of the day, that's how we're raised. We're raised by reinforcement from people that have more perspective about why actually making a varsity letter is a good thing for a kid, or it could be a good thing. There are plenty of people that excel in terms of their fulfillment, their happiness, their creativity, their energy, their joy by being on thirds. And they don't aspire to be on varsity, and that's totally fine. Maybe their varsity is in the theater, or it might be in the chemistry lab. And so I think and maybe they would beat themselves up the same way in that context, because they have a different way of thinking about it. So now that we've set the scene with how the soccer side of things went, I would love for you to share with the audience and our listeners what it was in that video that I'm going to share in the show notes so people can check it out for themselves. But a 9-minute video that Tucker's father, Tom, sent me almost in passing after a catch-up chat. He didn't say much about it. He just wanted to kind of share some updates about his kids, Tucker being one of his 3 kids, and the video being one of the links that he sent. And when I saw it, I was taken aback because it's more than a sports story, and it's very, very inspiring and cool, and so at so many levels. So would love to hear what that was all about. If you can sort of explain what it was that you worked on, how it ended up becoming valued by people in the soccer world or other parts of the university ecosystem. I think that'd be awesome to hear.
Absolutely. So I touched on this briefly when I was going through the whole story. So my sophomore year, again, got put in contact with varsity coaches. It was Rob Dow, and who's still the head coach, and Adrian Dubois, who was the former associate head coach. And got put in touch with them and started working on basically how we could leverage data science to help the men's soccer team win. That was kind of the bottom line. And so me and my 2 buddies,
So let
I
me pause you
mentioned
there.
before.
So would you the analogy that came to mind when I saw it, and maybe you'd agree, is Moneyball for soccer?
Yeah. I
Would
think
you agree with that?
yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. I think smaller in scale wasn't quite as production worthy, but yes, you could say Moneyball for soccer. So analytics is or and was already big in soccer, maybe not as big in college soccer. So we were kind of learning the ropes of some of the softwares that they had access to, and trying to figure out how what we were learning in our data science curriculum could apply, and what we could uncover and present to them that would help them make coaching decisions, and then what we could also show to the players that could help the players in game.
Hmm.
So the team has a software called Y-Scout. Loads of professional teams over pretty much every professional league in the world, from first division to second division, Spain, Costa Rica, Brazil, every country pretty much. And so we have all this data from college soccer, from all of UVM's games for this year, last year, all of their opponents, potential opponents, and then even if we wanted to, we could look at the professional leagues. So
So
what we
just real
land,
quick, is who's curating the data? Is this sort of like Bloomberg? There's some centralized kind of like
so
Y Scout, I guess, is somehow sending literally scouts to go record the data, or is it going through the boxes at every university, and someone somewhere is basically collecting this data and then feeding it to Y Scout? Could you just explain how that works?
so Y-Scout is the central kind of agency, and the teams. So we would film our game, and we would send the film to Y-Scout,
Hmm.
and they would have. I'm sure this has been updated with artificial intelligence, but at the time I think they had a team of 3 people that were basically tagging all the events of the game with the location. So like, pass happened at X and Y coordinate on the field, and the pass was received on X and Y coordinate. There were this many passes, this many were successful. The team is playing at this speed. They're playing this many passes per minute. This many defensive actions per minute, like all these different metrics. So we're still learning the ropes. We're just trying to decipher it, break it down to the coaching staff and the players. And what we landed on was making a pre-match and a post-match presentation. So pretty much we're aggregating some statistics. Really, there wasn't that much actual data science going on in terms of, model building or really any advanced visualization. We were kind of taking the stats that Y-Scout already was providing and just buttoning them up a little bit, adding some written interpretation, and throwing it on a slideshow and presenting it to the team. And that, evolved a little bit over the 4 years that I was doing it because I continued that even throughout when I was playing with the team. But for the most part, it was a pre-match and a post-match presentation to the team to try and help them win.
That is so awesome. I don't know if it might be available to you that would be, kosher with the soccer squad, but would love to just see a couple slides from that presentation.
Yeah,
Because
yeah,
it
absolutely.
sounds, I don't know if they'd be up for that, but I think it's, even if they blinded the names of the schools or the players, because it's very fast. It's strategic, right? Um, I never got to the level in any of my sports where I had to watch a lot of film or any of that kind of stuff, because my kind of fully committed athletic career ended in high school, I would say. Um, but I really admire, like when I watch, Hard Knocks or something on NFL, HBO's NFL behind the scenes. It's like they're watching film, they're looking at data, it's war games. And so how would you uh contrast the post game kind of presentation with the pre-game one? Obviously, you have the data from the game, but are you marking against some of the stats that maybe you pulled up, or let's say the things that became part of the game strategy, and whether or not the plan was accurate or the team executed against the plan? Is that how you think about it?
Yeah, so I think the main difference between the pre-match and the post-match is the pre-match is more focused on the opponent. So we're looking at some individual stuff, who's their best player? Do they have a weakness? Um, what's their style of play? And a lot of this is kind of gleaned from the coaching staff because they're watching a lot of film. So a lot of this they already know, and then we're using the data to either confirm what they're thinking or maybe challenge it. And if it's challenged, they'll go back, have a second look, um, because numbers don't tell the whole story, but neither does what you see. So you kind of need both. But going back to your question, pre-match is looking more at the opponent, how they play, who their best players are, do they have any weakness. And then the post-match is looking at still our opponent a little bit, but it's more focused on us. How did we perform? Did we execute on our game plan? Where did we do well, and where did we fall short for the most part?
Amazing. So I don't know if you've either seen the film Moneyball or read the book or kind of explored it, but um, my interpretation of the takeaway is partially that, you had a team that was, resource constrained. They had to use their intellect and their strategizing, their creativity, their innovation to, go toe to toe with the best, essentially very, very deep pocketed teams in the league. And so they figured out that you could basically take advantage of these undervalued players that would fit into their team like a mosaic that allowed them to thrive. And so, curious if there were any kind of concluding, or I don't know, maybe top level uh, takeaways from the exercise from your perspective. Is it, for example, that obviously every team is going to have a different best player. Most of the best players are going to have some of the same kinds of tricks. So there's that it's at some level, but of course every player is unique. It's a, soccer field is huge, and so there's a lot of things that can be done in a lot of places. Um, but did you find, for example, that there are certain hot spots on the field with certain teams that, if you were able to defend adequately, would dramatically reduce their threat to score and that kind of thing? Or is, like, I'm not sure if that's the right way to describe it, but were there any high level takeaways that, even without going team by team, that you felt like there were some real insights?
I think the most impactful thing was identifying individuals that were particularly strong or weak on the other team. Because in soccer, it's a low scoring game. So all it takes is one, bit of magic or one mistake. So kind of putting a focus on really restricting any player that they have that may be able to produce that bit of magic, or putting some pressure on any player that they have that might be susceptible to making a mistake, is really big. And the data can help identify that. A lot of that you can see just by watching film, which again, the coaches do a lot of, and they do a really good job at it. But other takeaways, I would say, the numbers can only tell you so much. There's so many variables in soccer, and a lot of it has to do with conditions that aren't recorded in the stats. A team could be coming off a really bad week of training where everyone, is a little bit down, maybe a real key leader in the team doesn't have the best attitude at the moment, and that can really just put a damper on the team and just like destroy their performance. Maybe, everyone on the team is sick. Maybe, they are feeling very confident for whatever reason. So there's a lot of factors that the numbers don't account for. So that was another takeaway, is that, you can't predict everything. And at the end of the day, it's just 22 guys are going to go out there and play a game, and anything can happen. So, yeah, sometimes you just got to go out and play.
Love that. Love that. Yeah. Again, the parallels with like entrepreneurship and professional pursuits are absolutely there. You can have the best business plan in the world and do all the research and all the logic, and believe me, I've been there. That kind of is convincing and shows you've done the work to kind of prepare, and yet the market will slap you right in the face. Like everything you put your business plan in the incinerator when an idea touches the market, which is the same thing of saying you can be academic about overly academic or precious, let's say, about the data when it comes to something as dynamic as soccer. But it's not until, it's game day and people are on the field, and, the unaccountables, some key gets an injury. The goalie has COVID, like could be any number of things. So all that's really interesting. But of course, just like all sports, I think it's, even with all those variables, you're doing what you can to kind of focus on what's in your control.
Right.
Which is awesome. So before we transition, I actually want to go back real quick to just see if you have anything you could share with us about what your role was on the team. Like once you made the team, presumably, in the YouTube video that people can check out, I got the real sense that your teammates really admired you. And they looked up to you, even though they may have been there on the squad since freshman year. They looked up to you because they actually were so inspired, not just by your work ethic and showing up and your journey, but that for someone to care as much about getting that spot as you, it made them realize how grateful they should be and how lucky they are, and how, they don't want to also let the other people down, including people like you that gave up a lot to make that level. So, but however you want to kind of respond to that, whether it's on the field, in the locker room, it seems like you might have been sort of an adjunct, professor consultant in a way with this tool that obviously people may have had questions about, and you would have been the, in-house, expert creator of it, which must have been awesome. But what was your role, in the team, and how did that differ from maybe earlier levels of playing soccer, let's say in high school, where you could be the standout, the star, which is, my brother played D1 lacrosse, and something I observed when watching his games and a lot of other friends that make it to D1, they are in for a surprise in a way when they realize that they're now playing the best player at every school they ever played on one team. Like pretty much it's the best player from around the world times 20, 30 people on the squad. And that's your opponent now. So your game has got to up level. But if you could just share a little bit about how your role at UVM either evolved or like how you saw yourself, and then how that contrasted with your earlier experiences playing soccer?
Yeah. So my role at UVM probably wasn't how I had envisioned it to be, when I'd first set out on this journey. I think when I first said I was going to walk on, I maybe had a picture in my head, I'd walk on freshman year, maybe wouldn't be top player, but then would kind of work my way up. And obviously, how the story went, that wasn't the case. I kind of just squeaked onto the team uh, in the 11th hour.
I
So
wouldn't
my
call it a
role,
squeak on. It was banging down the doors,
uh,
which is awesome. Not taking no for an answer, which is there's a lot to say for that. Which is awesome. So anyway, sorry to interrupt.
well, no, thank you. I appreciate that. Um, but by the time I was actually on the team, it was clear that, my role was going to be very much, focused on training, and it wasn't going to be um, making a big impact on the field. That was just the reality of it. Um, so yeah, I mean, I was pretty much the 29th, 30th guy on the roster, which is like the last guy. So I was just trying to find ways of, how it could help the team if I'm not playing the games. And for me, that was just, we've talked about controllables before. That was just controlling what I could control, which is showing up every day, working as hard as I possibly can, and being a good teammate. And then if I did those three things, I could, walk off the field, um, and go home, happy and, proud of what I did that day. So I just tried to do that every single training session. And I had it in my head that if I did those things, and I particularly with the working hard one, if I was pushing from the bottom up, that I could actually have an impact on the team. Because if I'm the last guy and I'm, pushing the guy in front of me, who's pushing the guy in front of him, who's pushing the guy in front of him, all the way up to the, our star player, um, and we're doing that more than other teams are doing it, and we're gonna win.
Mm.
So I tried to just take pride in the fact that I was outworking all the other guys and the other teams that were in my shoes.
Mm.
And by doing that, I was playing my part in doing my part in helping us win and, you know, achieve our goals of going far in the postseason and all this stuff.
Can I offer an observation or a
Yeah.
reflection even? I think that's a soccer player. The person who has the most points on the team, or the most minutes is not by definition a soccer player. I just think it's in the same way that, I had to go through my own kind of hero's journey as an entrepreneur, which is like, my last project was very, very hard and knocked me on my ass when all was said and done. It was like, holy shit, do I have what it takes to be an entrepreneur? And then I realized that actually what I went through and then what emerged from that is exactly what an entrepreneur is. That's the process. It's not the result. So I love that you came around to, that role, because soccer's a team sport. It's not tennis and it's not golf and it's not even racing. I mean, I would even say racing go-karts and cars of all sorts. That's a team sport too. The driver's the one, on the track or whatever, but I had a team in the pits that was 100% playing the same kind of role you played. Prepping, seeing things I didn't see, giving feedback, changing the tires, changing the pressure, changing the sprockets, adjusting the chassis or whatever. Like all that stuff is part of, like, there's no way I could have done that by myself. Certainly as a kid, I didn't know anything about anything. So it's 100% why team sports are so awesome. Yeah, because at the end of the day, like, maybe I'll say this because I don't think you will, but your dad shared with me. Like, correct me if I'm wrong, you were captain at the gunnery?
Yes.
Or you were,
Yeah.
okay, so captain the gunnery, you had several very solid D3 soccer programs interested in having you. And D1 was that there was a little bit of radio silence there, but you wanted to stretch into that as opposed to take D3, which is can be very, very competitive, but they're just trade-offs. And you had this ideal for yourself or vision for yourself of playing D1, and obviously it taking longer and being more challenging than anticipated doesn't mean you're any less of a soccer player.
Well, yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. So I think now I would love to rewind the tapes, actually, because clearly anyone who's listening to you is like, where'd this kid come from? I mean, like, he's so composed, well-spoken, clearly smart, innovative, D1 varsity athlete. You got the whole package. And so the very interesting thread I want to pull on is your education and your upbringing. So take us back.
Yeah, so we can start at Montessori. I think that's something I'd love to talk about. I went to Washington Montessori School, which again
And
is
before you dive into Montessori, maybe you can explain like what it is, because I know a lot of people may have heard of it, but I'm sure you're about to, but just in case.
No, that's a great point. So Montessori, I guess, is sometimes considered like an alternative education. It was developed by Maria Montessori in Italy, I believe, and it's really focusing on the whole child. So holistic education. Some of the things I think of when I think Montessori is focused on process. That's a big theme of some of the things we talked about. So process focused, learning through the senses. So there's a number of different learning materials that are specific to the Montessori education. So there's these math beads, like these strings of beads, squares of beads that are basically used as tactile materials for addition, subtraction, multiplication. So you're seeing the math being done, you're thinking about it, you're feeling it. Just provides multiple perspectives and a more thorough learning for the material. And then another big one is multi-age classrooms. So there's like sections for, let's say, 1st through 8th grade, which was how my Montessori school was structured. So 1st through 3rd grade is grouped together in lower elementary, 4th and 5th grade is grouped together in upper elementary, and then 6th through 8th is middle school. And that's really important because those age groupings, teach you to communicate with people that are older than you, younger than you. They teach you how to be a mentor to maybe you're in 3rd grade and you're mentoring a 1st grader. Maybe you're in 1st grade and you're getting mentored by someone. So it teaches you how to act in different dynamics. Again, how to speak to people that are older, younger. Lots of things that I really enjoyed, but my biggest takeaway from it was, again, we've talked about this a few times, but how process focused it was. And that brings me to a point that I should have mentioned first, is that there's no letter grades at Montessori. So in middle school, maybe you'll have a percentage grade for a test or a quiz, but overall throughout your 8 years there, you don't get, a letter grade on your report card. You have some written comments by your teachers that just speak to, your character. Are you putting in the effort? Do you have the right attitude? So again, are you controlling what you can control? Pretty much is what they're teaching you to value by saying you either, you had good effort, you had good attitude, or you didn't. So that was my early education, was Montessori, 1st through 8th grade, which again, I think the takeaway there is taught me to be process focused and to care about, again, the controllables over the results. From there, I transitioned to the Frederick Gun School. At the time, it was the gunnery when we both went there. And that was a slightly more traditional environment. It's a boarding school in Washington, Connecticut. And it was still, I would say, focused on developing character, in the sense that that was an aspect of the report cards. There are comments about, your behavior and all this stuff, but this was the first time that I was exposed to, getting a grade. You got an 80 in this, I think it was percentage when I was there. You got like an 80% in this class, you got an 82, whatever it was. And that was really challenging when I first got there. So my freshman year, I wasn't used to grades, and all of a sudden I was saying, "Oh, you got a 90, you got a 80, you got a 70," and I was just so stressed because
Mhm.
I thought I had to get 100 on everything. And over time, I kind of figured that out and started to learn how to be process focused on my own without being in the kind of um, rose-colored environment of Montessori. So I kind
Mhm.
of learned how to have that on my own, which was really important. So that was something that Frederick Gun School gave me, which was yeah, that was very important. And then I ended up at UVM, so that was my kind of early education.
Lots of amazing things there. I mean, I think I'm sure the vast majority of people listening, uh, didn't, maybe even almost all of the people listening did not go to Montessori. I didn't go. And so to hear what that experience was like and to contrast that against the more traditional model, which I think is flawed in many ways, but there's also some virtue in some of it. And hearing that you were able to kind of take the best parts of each and make it work after a period of transition, I think is really great. But it does, because it does beg the question about, or it begs a reflection about the way we educate through the system, which is sort of like producing people to um, sort of like compete against their peers, um, to judge their value, or to have a sense of either confidence or ability based on a letter grade that may or may not have been a subject that is really a good fit for them, or maybe the teacher wasn't that great, or maybe they had stuff going on at home or elsewhere, and like it's not fair to kind of judge your value based on the result. I think the Montessori approach of focusing on the controllables is really, really interesting. So I'm wondering then, so I know like at gunnery and to some extent in college, there's always a handful of people that stand out for their uh how brilliant they are, their grades, their how easy things seem to come to them. Sometimes it's someone who also works very, very hard, but a lot of times it seems like the person who's getting the very, very best grade is sort of just a prodigy of some sort. So I'm wondering then how you looked at your peers, that you're in classes with people that are up to 2 years ahead of you and up to 2 years below you, if I'm not mistaken. And so then, like, what is the uh in a social setting, in a community setting, um how do you sort of rank, if you will, or judge, if you will, your peers? Does it correspond to how they show up for the community, and like how kind they are, how hardworking they are, how hard they try, how earnest they are, or are there other things that um, at some point you actually look through that and to see actually they're really, really smart anyway, and they just have the whole package. So I'm just wondering, like, if you have any examples of how you thought about you know uh, assessing your peers in the Montessori school versus more traditional platforms.
Yeah, I think at Montessori, I was never really like assessing my peers, I wouldn't say. Um, there was definitely a lot of overlap socially. And sometimes you'd overlap in the classroom if someone, older was a little behind or someone younger was a little bit ahead. Because again, it's very much a learn at your own pace environment. Um, but yeah, I wouldn't say there was any rank or assessment. Um, maybe I'm answering that wrong.
Sorry for the weed whacker. I'm going to close the window. Um, um, I don't think you're answering. I actually think the way I asked the question was sort of wrong. It sort of suggested I was always judging and assessing my peers, but I was just trying to get a sense for like if you think about like the fact that as humans we have like hierarchies, like in
Right.
every group and every whether it's a team, a school, a company, a family, there's a hierarchy, and there's like a dominance hierarchy. There's a people play different roles. All great movies, all great Disney movies. There's kind of usually this kind of hierarchy. How did that, to the extent you agree with that, and that's just the way humans order, we're social beings, so that's the way we kind of order ourselves is
Right.
establishing some sense of who's a leader, who's reliable, who can I trust, who should I look up to. um so I guess the question then is, would you agree that there's some kind of hierarchy that even as a young kid you kind of had some sense of, or is it actually, to use your phrase, rose tinted glasses, where none of that was even unconsciously in play? It was actually way more about your own personal experience, the kind of the individual experience, and at times the collaborative experience, but never in any way kind of ranking, assessing, judging others, which is another way of saying judging yourself.
I think that's an interesting point. I think there was some of it, although it was never like a conscious thought then. But looking back, just like now, when you're in a group, whether it's, there's older and younger mixed together, or it's just a group of buddies, there's going to be different leaders in different settings. So, like going back to Montessori, if we're looking at first through third grade, like when it's recess and we're playing soccer, like maybe I'm one of the leaders. But when, it switches to, we're playing uh two-touch football, maybe the leader's a little different. Or when we're in Spanish class, maybe, there's someone that excels there and they kind of take the lead. And the dynamics are always shifting. But I don't think that's any different than, um, you know, outside of school, like into early adulthood. It's yeah,
I think you raised a point that made me think of emotional intelligence, because I think emotional intelligence would come into play in a lot of those dynamics where it's also like a kind of social intelligence, a kind of understanding that, we very, very often operate in groups in relation to others, and there's the players involved and the roles that they play, whether utility player on a soccer team in one dynamic, or you go home for the summer and you're back to being the star, and there's just like a different, so like that shift is there. But do you feel like there were other like life skills or maybe even lessons imparted to you from either Montessori or the Frederick Gunn School that you brought with you to other things, including, for example, like sort of these intangibles that have more to do with kind of, you know, character, ethics. I think emotional intelligence could be an example. Uh, leadership. Like, were there any lessons or examples of things that kind of stand out to you in that respect?
definitely. At Montessori, again, I'm gonna sound like a broken record here, but the thing that always stands out the most, and I'll always attribute to Montessori, is how they made me, um, not worry about the results, focus on the journey, focus on the process. And that's something that I've taken with me through, you know, everything I've done so far. And I will hopefully continue thinking like that in everything I do in the future. That's the main thing. But they also always place just a huge emphasis on treating people well, treat people how you'd like to be treated, which I think is so, so important. And I think we need more reminders of that. And then going into Frederick Gunn School, I think I got a lot more independent there. I was a day student at Frederick Gunn School, which means it's a boarding school, but I live nearby, so I would basically commute. But still, you're there, Monday through Saturday, often from 7, 8 a.m. to past dinner. So you're on your own a lot, and you just learn how to manage your own time, operate without the supervision of your parents, and all sorts of stuff that's really important going to college and beyond. So that's the main thing I got out of those two.
So I'd love to hear you offer maybe some candid, feedback or perspective as someone who ended up having to transition to the Frederick Gunn School, which is kind of, I would consider a kind of a hybrid in some way. Like when I was there, you mentioned 80% and 85%. When I was there, I think there was some of that, but there was they had their own grading system that had phrases like honors, high honors, distinction, um, pass, So no one really knew what that was outside the school. They had to kind of break it down to colleges and explain what that meant in terms of a GPA or whatever. So that was an example of hybrid in one respect. And then they also, while I was there, introduced the second report card, which I think is actually the more important one. And it aligns with the Montessori approach, or it's certainly as important, which is the character thing. It's like, did you work hard? Did you treat people right? Are you a leader on campus? Do you have a good attitude? The controllables. And I felt like that was really great that they had that. I probably still have a copy of it somewhere because I keep all that stuff. But I know that many schools don't have anything close to that. Certainly, we're very privileged to be able to be to have been given the chance to go to these kinds of schools. And it's something I'm very passionate about because I realize that there's kind of a great responsibility that comes with what we've been given. And you mentioned that being a driver for you wanting to keep going at UVM, and for me with the Latitude, like I want a lot of our programming to be basically zero cost, free scholarship. Like you don't need to have the ability to pay what our a state school university type tuition in high school and then also in middle school to be able to access tools, resources, community, guidance, mentors, coaches. So I'm really passionate about that. But because you actually, in some ways, started, let's call it, in some ways, it's a good example to say far left Montessori. Then you scooched a little bit more right with the Frederick Gunn School. And then UVM, a very well regarded, state school with a lot of great programs that you've been able to experience, but probably a more traditional approach in many respects. But I could be wrong. I mean, in Vermont, who knows what's going on up there? But I think I would love to hear your reflection then on what you think needs to be adjusted, like about, let's say, the traditional college experience, the fact that most people are typically doing it in 4 years and it's quite expensive. I think you graduated early, so you actually ended up forcing your way through, that constraint in your own way, which maps to this whole conversation. But wanted to hear, like, if you had the ability to kind of reflect and share a message with the powers that be, the heads of these schools, the president of your university, or any other major one out there, what would you want to say?
I want to address one point you brought up just a second ago, which I think is really important, which again is that and I should have mentioned this earlier, I recognize that my education history is not typical, and I feel very, very, very grateful to have received that education. And again, I attribute, pretty much any success that I've had or will have to really Montessori in particular, but all the Montessori, Frederick Gunn, UVM. Yeah, I just want to say that it's not typical, and I feel like you said, um, a responsibility to do right by that privilege, um, by what I do in the future. And then to address your actual question about what I think needs changing in the education system, I think it's difficult because what I would say is a model like Montessori is amazing because there's loads of one-on-one attention. It's about character, it's about integrity, it's about the intangibles. And of course, the the science, the math, the languages, that's all extremely important to learn. But bottom line, education should be focused on producing young people that have high moral character.
Hmm.
And that requires a lot of one-on-one attention so that, instructors can effectively evaluate those things and report on them. Um, I went to, again, UVM, which is a bigger school where that's not realistic. There's 12,000 students. There's not enough faculty to be, giving one-on-one attention to students. And I think it's more important when you're young. But bottom line, I would say, especially with early education, it's addressing and evaluating the intangibles, and make sure that our education system is cultivating the things that matter, which is the controllables. We want we want young people who are working hard, who have high character, who are kind, who are empathetic, who are caring, who are effective communicators, who are reliable. You know, I could go on with a list, but yeah, just making sure we're cultivating intangibles, especially in early education, would be something that I think is really, really important to focus on. With with my very, very limited life experience, I wanna add that as a caveat.
I mean, we all have limited life experience. That's all you can ever work with in a way. Obviously, you can read and learn and engage with others, but yeah, I mean, sharing your journey is very unique. And I'm sure there are plenty of other Montessori people. Maybe I can have some more on this podcast because I kind of want to know their story too. Because I'm sort of gobsmacked by this conversation and who I'm learning you are, and the obviously we share the alma mater with the gunnery and mater with the gunnery, and that your dad has been my mentor now for well over a decade, which has been awesome, and I see you and him and you, which is really awesome. So it's connecting the dots for me about a lot of these things, the character stuff, the education principles. He said in our other conversation, which I will be connecting to this one because it's complementary, that the tuition, and again, coming from a place of privilege, acknowledge the incredible opportunities that your parents were able to afford to you, which is there's almost not enough you could say about that. But he said it was the best sending you to you and your siblings to Montessori was the best investment he ever made, bar none. And he considers all education investment, which I think is the right phrase. Particularly, it's awesome to hear from someone who's in financial services because it is an investment. And I actually have a lot to say that I will address another time about how you can actually learn a lot about finance as it relates to education, because I think I'm actually going to make a quick tangent about this, which is like, I don't know if you know finance, like a balance sheet. There's assets, liabilities, and equity. Okay. So on the liability side, the financial side, the side that counts dollars and cents, when you think about your education, let's say you have student loans, you only have the liability side. You only have the expense, the investment, the capitalized investment, let's say, or the expense, capitalized expense on your balance sheet as a liability. But you don't have the other side. The balance sheet has to be always balanced. So the assets or equity have to be correspondingly adjusted. So let's say you're $100,000 in student debt, and you add that to the balance sheet. Well, your balance sheet's out of balance by 100,000. So where's that? You can either take it out of equity and basically say you're worth less, or the more realistic and I think appropriate approach is to say, no, you have an asset now that's worth not only 100,000, that was the cost. People that invest money will say that the cost is like let's say the fixed cost of buying a building or something. That's the cost, but that doesn't mean that's the value. The value, in my mind, with education has infinite potential. I mean, you can grow into your education, and you should, and I do, and I'm sure you do. Constantly try to learn, because that's the most important asset I think you have, other than your health, probably.
Right.
And certainly relationships are part of it. But so these intangibles should be thought of like your dad. I'm rounding, I'm sort of bolstering what I think he was saying, which is it's an investment. And it's not something we should treat as anything but that. Because one of the things that has occurred to me over time, I've always been sort of passionate about leadership and civic engagement and like just social issues, trying to understand them as best I can and whatnot. And I think that the thing that always pops up to the top of the list of things to care about, in my mind, is education. Because we can't control the outputs or the outcomes of everyone in the world, but if you can give them all as close as possible to the same kind of education, like the kind that you had or like the kind that I had, we're gonna have a lot more competition, and that would be good. In the sense of people feeling more empowered, people being feeling more in control of their life, having higher earning potential, a number of things that flourish from education. Like being all the way down to the family level, like it just connects. And as you said, as a young kid, getting attention on things that weren't necessarily, multiplication tables, it was about you and how you were learning and showing up. That's where our brains are like very much a sponge, and we're learning who we are and how the world works. And it seems like that was so formative for you that you brought it to everything else. So a question for you then is, with the moral character being maybe the central, let's say, backbone of what you think you got, and I certainly think you got from Montessori, how did that translate to how you learn?
I think Montessori really encouraged the idea that learning is the reward, not that learning leads to some grade or some piece of knowledge that will make you, feel good or anything like that. Learning is the reward. So through Montessori, I really learned to love to learn. So, and I think that's like so useful, because it just makes going through life pretty awesome, because I think it made me more curious. It makes me, you know, makes me excited to, encounter new things, because it means I get to, learn something new and form a connection to something that I already know about. Yeah, I think Montessori just made me love learning, which again, I think it just makes life so much better when learning is a joy and not a burden.
I couldn't agree more. I'll refrain from going on a tangent about another thing I believe strongly in is the liberal arts approach to education, which I think is by far the most durable kind of education, in my opinion, as opposed to a domain that you be like, it's obviously great to become an expert in a domain. Don't get me wrong. And the pre-professional schools, totally get it. It's awesome. But I think what you said there is exactly the same for me about synthesizing these different domains into maybe novel ideas. So it's like you're as a kid, you learn numbers and math, and that became data and by your senses, and in a way that was maybe at the beginning it was slow, and maybe it was kind of, it wasn't about, again, the test or about the math B or the SATs or whatever. It was just about the actual domain of learning something new that you'd be able to then bring into your professional career later. Certainly, I'm sure some of the writing or creative things that you've done have kind of in some ways borrowed from some of the ideas that you might see in math, which are amazing. I mean, like a Fibonacci sequence. I mean, this is something traders look at, but it's like math is cool. Like math gets a bad rep sometimes, but there's some really cool stuff there. And that could spark an interest in physics, and it could spark an interest in geometry, and it could spark an interest in architecture and all these things. And so I think going forward now in the age of AI, where so much of like the rote processing is now not just table stakes, it's like commoditized. Like you don't need to do multiplication tables with pen and paper. Although it's good to know, you don't need it, because you now need to know how to use all these tools to create something better, to synthesize, to bring things together that build off of all these different domains that can, in your case, lead to Moneyball for soccer. So I think that is really, really awesome. Another thing that your dad told me that is very kind of evident to me is that his 3 kids, including you, that went to Montessori, are very accepting of others. Could you just say a word, a bit about what that means from your perspective?
Absolutely. I think that ties into what I said a little earlier about how much of a focus Montessori puts on treating others well. So lots of reminders, golden rule, treat people how you'd like to be treated. So I just was kind of inundated with those reminders and that an environment that values that. So it's nothing really to do with me. It's just getting placed in that environment kind of molds you into someone who thinks like that. And I think other environments too are really good about cultivating people who are really caring and compassionate and accepting. I've, you know, tons of friends and colleagues who are, extremely accepting and welcoming and kind, and they didn't go to a Montessori. So
Yeah.
I think there's lots of different ways to get there. It has a lot to do with your environment, your parents, the people you hang out with. But yeah, I attribute Montessori a lot um, for my own, I guess, compassion.
And just to kind of uh, get one more perspective on this point that I think might be interesting. You mentioned the steep learning curve, I guess you could call it, or period of transition that was difficult, going from an environment like Montessori to the Frederick Gunn School, which is more traditional. When I was there, you wore a jacket and tie every day, and it was like Harry Potter kind of school. Really awesome, but definitely different. To then going to a major state school with 12,000 students that come from all walks of life from around the world and all that. And so you mentioned the friction as it relates to like the outcome like including the outcomes now in your day to day in terms of your goals and your assessment and all that stuff. But have you found it difficult to, or challenging to be confronted with others that don't have that same compassion and, kindness and generosity and all those things that your parents certainly have? Because I know firsthand, and I know you do, but there are a lot of people that, and I actually have compassion for them because I know that a lot of times they're the product of whatever they grew up with. But how have you dealt with that? Like, is it a boundaries thing? Is it sometimes like, was there a period of, you go from a tiny, tiny town in Washington, Connecticut, and Montessori is probably even smaller, wherever that is. Woodbury is a tiny, tiny town. For those that don't know, it's the antique capital of New England. Like, I mean, the high school we went to did not have cell phone service to this day. Then, when cell phones were new in 2006, when I graduated, and then even now, no cell phone service. So it's a bucolic kind of beautiful place that is, I think, rightfully but significantly disconnected from reality in some ways, because it's utopia in a lot of ways. And the further I am from it, the more I appreciate that was the case. So what has been your experience in interacting with others that maybe don't have that same moral, I don't know if more, I don't want to judge it, but moral character? I mean, let's just use politics because that's an easy example. There are plenty of people in politics that seem to have dubious character, attributes that feel less authentic in some ways. But whether or not that's true, that's my impression. So what has been your experience?
Well, I think to start, Burlington, where I've been for the past, I think, yeah, 4.5, 5 years, is a great area, and there's a lot of people that are, you know, really, it's just an accepting place. There's a lot of accepting people. There's a lot of people that are really kind. But just like anywhere, there will be people that aren't like that. Um, and like you said, I think it's helpful to remind yourself that, people who are maybe acting not with uh, huge amounts of empathy or kindness are probably acting like that because of, past trauma or pain they've experienced. So a quote I really like, um, for these kinds of discussions is from Ted Lasso. The
You remind me of
the
Ted Lasso. You might be trending on Twitter after this for Ted Lasso, the real deal.
But he said, I can't remember what episode it was, but in the scene where they're playing darts, he said, "Be curious, not judgmental."
Mm.
And so I think that really applies to this. When you encounter someone that's acting in a way that you don't agree with, or if you catch yourself acting against your values, just be curious about why you or they are acting that way instead of, lashing out and saying they're a bad person, they're this, they're that. And I also just want to say, like, me in high school and in the early stage of college, like, I'm not trying to say I was this high high character, moral being. Like, I was, had loads of insecurities that made me act in ways that I'm not proud of. Um, which is why I think it's really important to have that kind of be curious, not judgmental mindset, because everyone's got their own insecurities. Some people have, past trauma that um manifests in poor choices um uh, and you know, not very, like I said, not very empathetic or not very kind behaviors. So yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on that.
That's great. That's great. I think that's a extremely, I think, productive way to, um, and healthy way to kind of think about, how we engage and our role as well, and helping those people, along, without being someone that is yet another person that causes them trouble. So I have a few more questions, and then we'll wrap up with a few more questions. So the first is, you mentioned sort of insecurities and whatnot. I'd be curious, do you have any fears that come to mind as just like really important fears for you?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things I'm afraid of, but I I would be afraid most of kind of like succumbing to those fears.
Hmm.
Because I think everyone has fears. Um, no one's just like, yeah, nobody's fearless. Everybody has fears, and then, you make the decision to be courageous, which is just choosing to act in spite of those fears. So yeah, I guess my biggest fear would be succumbing to my fears. I don't know if that makes sense, but um, yeah. And then you mentioned insecurities. Yeah, there's tons of things I'm still insecure about. But I think every day, if you can talk about them out loud in a voice memo to someone, it always it always makes I don't know. I feel like talking about them, out loud in a voice memo to someone always kind of chips away at the insecurities until eventually they're just, something that is no bother to you. And that's
Mm-hmm.
always a moment of pride. But you're gonna have insecurities throughout your whole life. But um, yeah, something I've learned recently is just to um, chip away at them little by little and acknowledge that I'll never be like fully not fully free of insecurity, but that just gotta accept it and try your best to chip away at them and um, be compassionate for other people that are going through the exact same thing as you, because everyone's just navigating their own insecurities, and
Mm-hmm.
some people are this far along on the path, some people are down here, some people are ahead. So not
Mm-hmm.
getting jealous, not being judgmental, just um, focusing on what you can control.
Beautifully said. Yeah. There's a couple teachings that come to mind. One of them is Ray Dalio has got this great like animated graphic. Um, and his book Principles is terrific. It's one of the books I've gifted to the most people because it's so great. But the animation that he has somewhere on YouTube, you can look it up, and I'll put it in the show notes. Shows that the life journey for everyone, no matter who you are, where you were born, how lucky or not you've been, um, is like the journey of personal development, self-discovery, self-actualization. It basically follows this cycle that goes over and over, and it is essentially um, suffering well. So you're basically going through some experience, you get hit on your ass, you pick yourself back up, you're a little bit stronger, you kind of start getting your mojo back, you get hit on your ass, you do it again, but the arc is going up and to the right. People think it's a straight line for Ray Dalio. Oh God, he's a billionaire. How guy? I can never be like him. Well, actually, Ray Dalio's story includes getting knocked on his ass many times, including having to fire everyone in his company in the early days, 70s or 80s, when he made a bad call and had to hunker down. And it was just him running a tiny little hedge fund that has now become one of the world's biggest hedge funds. And I know, talking about money as an example, or like obviously a story that involves money, that's really not the point. The point is that his story, like so many other founders and other people I look up to, includes a lot of obstacles, and those obstacles presented insecurities, but that they felt the fear and did it anyway. They kept going. And I think that is something I also try to live by. Um, Having this podcast, like it could have been an idea on the whiteboard for a long time, but I was like, you know what? Why not? I look up to all these people that are podcasters, so I'm going to throw my hat in the ring and see what happens. Um, And I've just treated a lot of my professional life since graduating like that. Like, just try Wall Street, do that for a little while, go to film, go to entertainment, go to Hollywood and be in film. Do that for a little while, start a pet food company. Do that for a little while, start a coaching company. I think this one is is the one that is really going to stick because it feels so aligned. But and that's one reason why my upcoming program, around the 5 summits, is kind of a reflection of all these lessons I've learned that basically require these 5 pillars that I think are necessary for success in business, but in life as well. And I'll share more about that, like in the show notes and afterwards. But I'll quickly just say they include a lot of things we're talking about. So it's values, vitality, so taking care of yourself physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally. Vision, knowing where you want to go, knowing you want to make the varsity team, knowing you want to, excel in data science, and just envisioning that and knowing for sure that that's actually what you want. That becomes your roadmap. Then there's velocity, which is like actually blocking and tackling, building the thing, doing, training, learning from others that have kind of walked the path, and the approaches or the shortcuts that can kind of get you where you need to go with less bumps and bruises. And then the last is amongst the most important to me. It's something I'm passionate about, and it's also something I think is essential for everyone, is leadership. Because I think leadership starts with self, and then, like you said, the high moral character for self. That means that you can lead a team and a company and a dorm, a community, a class, whatever it is. And I think we all know when the leader that gets to a certain level doesn't have that, and it's very hollow. So anyway, something I will be sharing more with as my podcast career goes on. Last couple questions for you. So who are your role models?
Yeah, I would say definitely my parents. Um, we've had some discussions about definitely my dad, obviously, who you have a relationship with. But my mom too. I think they have really similar qualities in that they're both selfless, um, both of high character, and I mean they're both unique from each other in the sense that when I think of my dad, I think hardworking. I think he's reliable. I think um, he's capable, um, among many other things. And then when I think of my mom, the things that come to mind are um, she's curious, she's kind, um, very caring. And I think, my dad is also those things. He's also curious, kind, and caring. My mom is also reliable. Um, I can't remember the other ones. Uh, but they both embody they both embody all those traits. Those are just what I think of individually, and I'm kind of trying with how I live my life to embody a combination of all those, just because I really look up to them from a character perspective, um, and in other aspects of life too. But really, I just think they have high character, and I want to do right by them by exuding some of those same values as I kind of learn and grow and all this stuff. And then in each of my in work, I have role models, and in soccer, I have role models, but it all really comes back to my parents.
Awesome. No wonder why they say Montessori was such a good investment. Yeah, and I will give a shout out to your dad. I think he's just been, it's been one of the best mentor-mentee relationships I've ever had, in part because he is reliable, he's wise, he's very smart, he's got so many interesting things going on in his life from my perspective, like just staying active and like playing hockey in his 60s and doing marathons and all these things. Like that's like a role model for me. I want to be doing that stuff. And that he speaks to like some of the topics we touched on today around education, not as someone that was like thinking about it in the rearview mirror because his kids have been through it and good for your family, the parents, but also because I think he really cares about the broader issues here. And I think he has a lot to contribute to that discussion. So, and I don't know your mom as well, but obviously if she's married to Tom and birthed you and your two siblings, she's very wonderful in my eyes. So last question for you is if you, and this is, I'm borrowing from Tim Ferriss here. If you had a message to share to 1 million people, let's say, a wide audience, including people up like at every kind of segment of society that you wanted a message to be, you wanted to impart a message on, like what would you say and why?
Yeah, I want to share something that I wrote during kind of the culmination of my UVM soccer journey. So in my notes app, I have this document called my walk-on journey, and kind of just wrote out all the details of like, what I was doing and why I was doing throughout, from when I started playing soccer to the end of it. And at the end of the document, I have basically 3 lessons that I learned from the whole ordeal. And I want to share those. And that, but just to preface it, again, I just want to acknowledge, like, I'm very proud of this journey, but at the end of the day, it's just soccer, and I'm early in my journey, and there's a lot more to learn, but I think these 3 things are worth sharing. So I'm going to start with number 1, which is trying is a win-win. So either you reach what you set out to achieve, or you can walk away proud knowing you gave it your all. 2 is don't wait for the perfect moment to make it happen. There will always be a reason not to do something. Just go for it and figure it out on the way. And then 3, it is good to be ambitious, but ambition is a responsibility. If you constantly make commitments to yourself about completing lofty goals that you seldom achieve, what kind of relationship will you have with yourself? Constantly breaking promises to yourself, such as goals, leads to a lack of trust in oneself and thus a lack of confidence.
Amazing. Your wisdom is beyond your years. It's really terrific. I think a lot of people are going to enjoy this conversation and take a lot out of it. Before I let you go, what are you looking to do in the future? You've now got this, fresh, fancy, data science degree. You've got a job or internship or something in Burlington at the moment, and nothing but opportunity ahead of you. So I think a lot of companies would be silly not to try to hire you, and would love to hear what you have to say in terms of what you're looking for and how people can contact you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Well, right now I'm working for a small med tech startup called Biocognitive in Burlington, Vermont. They're working on a sepsis early detection software. Just got FDA breakthrough device designation, which is really, really exciting. And the team there is just awesome. I feel a lot of similar feelings I feel with, being a part of UVM Soccer. I feel the same way when I go into work. It's just I'm around 10 super, super, super smart people. And just by being in the room, I feel like I'm benefiting. And in particular, what my supervisor, Jeremy Huckins, is, I just want to talk about him briefly because he's been really wonderful. Has just a wealth of knowledge, PhD and postdoc from Dartmouth, and like he really highlights the point I made about, when I go into the office, all I have to do is kind of show up, and I just get better by virtue of being around these people, and especially Jeremy. I'm just always asking him all sorts of questions about, um, you know, sepsis, which is what we're working on, or his old research in neuroscience, or I'm really interested in wearables, and I'll ask him about that, and he's got great insights. So it's just been wonderful to learn under him. and that kind of segues into what I'm trying to do next. Which one of my big long-term goals is to be able to impact one major humanitarian issue. And I think the most immediate avenue where I see that as a possibility is in the health space. So there's all sorts of health issues going on in the US and otherwise, but like the anxiety, depression, these things I think are really pertinent. And I see kind of wearables as a way to address some of these issues. And the reason I say that is, when you have a wearable, whether it's a Fitbit or a Whoop or a Garmin or whatever it is, you get all this data about how your behaviors and your lifestyle choices impact your health, and you can see it, day to day.
That
And
too.
what right on, right on. Um, and what the research from these companies and from academic settings is suggesting is that some of the most important things for a healthy life is, yes, of course, nutrition and exercise and getting outside and all that stuff that is really, really important, but also social connection and showing gratitude and being mindful, like that really impacts your health. And I think the more that um, wearables usage increases and the more accurate the technology gets, the more people are going to realize, oh, you know, when I feel connected, when I'm grateful, when I'm mindful, I feel better. And then pretty soon we have a world where everyone's more connected, everyone's more grateful, everyone's more mindful. And 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 yeah, that's why I see wearables as like a really cool avenue to kind of attack some of these big issues like anxiety and depression that are really kind of plaguing everyone, but young people especially that have a lot on their plate and a lot of distraction.
Amazing. Super inspiring. Is there any company in particular you would love to hear from?
Yeah, I think Whoop is kind of at the forefront of the wearable space, and they're doing a lot of cool stuff. And um, I've done some listening to some of their executive team, Will Ahmed. I've listened to him and got to listen to Kristen Holmes chat about kind of the research they're doing there. And I think that, touches on some of the things that I just mentioned. A lot of what I just mentioned is inspired by those talks. So I'd say um, that's at the top of the list.
Amazing. Will, if you're listening, and if the Whoop team is listening, highly recommend getting in contact with Tucker. I've actually texted him earlier before this chat that I'm going to hire him too. So hopefully I don't steal him full time before someone else gets there. Or hopefully for me, I do. But awesome conversation. Really appreciate you taking all this time, sharing your story so honestly and authentically and wisely. Um, it's so great all around, and it's been a pleasure having you on my very first episode of Quiet Leaders. So thanks a lot, Tucker.
Thank you so much, Patrick. That was a blast.
Awesome. All right.